In the first shots of the film, dogs are shown undergoing various experiments, apparently not always legal. On one of the days at the Korea National Security Council, there are intense debates regarding a recent hostage-taking incident. Everything is complicated by the department head's intention to run for president. His assistant, Jong Won, suggests not giving in to the terrorist provocations and refusing any negotiations with them, which outrages those present. However, the presidential candidate approves of his actions and gives him a bonus, knowing that Jong Won is raising his daughter alone after his wife's death, and the girl dreams of studying abroad. Later, Jong Won and Jong Min are packing their belongings. The girl doesn't understand why her father is selling the house, but he is prepared to do anything so she can receive an education. He notices his late wife's book in his daughter's suitcase, but the girl says she knows better what she might need. Later, they head to the airport, stopping at a gas station. The attendant refuses to take a card, demanding cash, which angers Jong Won. In the end, he drives off without paying for the gas. At this time in the airport, there's a dispute between the athlete Yura and her manager Mi, run over a passport that wasn't renewed in time when an elderly woman approaches them, mistaking Yura for her niece. The friends realize the old woman has dementia and try to defuse the situation. But then her husband appears and takes the grandmother onto a bus. The girls decide to return home. Meanwhile, a dense fog descends over the area around the airport. Yura and Miran, getting into their car, notice that visibility has dropped drastically. The elderly woman and her husband are also driving on the bridge among the stream of cars, just like hundreds of other people. The drivers try to go more slowly. However, as always, there's a reckless driver who drifts, angering everyone around. And while the father swerves to avoid this reckless driver, Young Min notices a van with barred windows, behind which large fighting dogs can be seen. In the vehicle accompanying this van is a professor who is swallowing some pills and listening to assurances that the laboratory is already close by and they will arrive soon. At this moment, the driver of a large truck, unable to stop his vehicle, crashes into the reckless driver. A chain reaction begins. One car hits another, creating a giant traffic jam. As a result, one side of the bridge becomes blocked by a huge number of wrecked cars. The truck completes the disruption, blocking the lane and causing terrible damage. Meanwhile, the gas station owner, upon learning about the brazen driver, demands that the attendant return them money for the gas. The attendant jumps into a tow truck and goes out in search of this debtor, taking his small dog with him. Meanwhile, the escort vehicle breaks down, losing sight of the van carrying the dogs, which has gotten far ahead. Jong Won also gets into an accident, not far from the military van. He calls his boss, since this is a large-scale incident, and the boss must take action. Meanwhile, the military try to call the driver of the second van, which went on ahead, but no one answers, so they decide to catch up to it on foot. They run across the bridge and soon find the van. However, its doors are open and there's nobody inside. Clearly alarmed by this, the commander orders that all cell phone signals on the bridge be jammed. Many people stuck in the accident are left without any connection. Meanwhile, Jong Won gives first aid to the injured professor when he notices that his daughter has disappeared somewhere and he rushes to find her. As for Young Min, she just saw a dog nearby, banging its head against the bridge's railing. She wants to feed it and comes close enough to read the name on its collar, E9. Then her father finds her, warning that the dog might be dangerous. In the meantime, many of the stranded passengers spot the dogs, and although they are calm for now, their appearance is sinister. The military return to Jong Won's car, where the professor is sitting, and report to him about the escape of the first experimental batch. They ask him to block the system, so he opens his laptop, something Jong Won, standing nearby, notices. Jong Won demands an explanation, but they tell him a helicopter will arrive soon and sort everything out. Jong Won becomes even more puzzled, because flying a helicopter in such conditions is a sure path to disaster. He introduces himself, showing his national security ID, demands they identify their branch of service, and immediately disable the jammer, but they restrain him. Meanwhile, the attendant arrives at the accident site, where one of those stranded asks him to tow his car. The guy instantly senses his benefit and starts working for a reward. Jong Won threatens the professor, demanding to be released. However, the scientist isn't afraid because, according to him, if it all goes wrong, they will all end up as corpses. He activates the system and, naming the project Silence, orders the operation to begin. Once the dogs detect the code, they start gathering toward the van, but one of the dogs suddenly stops, which puzzles the professor. He realizes that E9 is uncontrollable, and although the rest of the pack has already run back to the van, this dog doesn't hurry. The professor orders them to drive away the others. At that moment, a military helicopter hovers over the bridge and lowers a cage onto the van. Several soldiers rush to secure it. Jung-won demands an explanation from the professor, but the scientist advises him to ask his boss about Project Silence. Jung-won again demands the jammer be turned off as he must contact his boss. Meanwhile, the professor hears barking and sees the attendant's small dog, Judy. The guy tries to catch her, but the soldiers grab him, preventing him from reaching the spot. The professor orders the small dog to be removed while simultaneously trying to call E9 and make her come over to the van. However, the cage is already lifting off the ground when one of the soldiers finds the missing control chip for dog E9. Immediately, E9 breaks into the helicopter cockpit and kills the pilot. The helicopter swerves, the cage breaks off and falls onto the bridge, springing open and releasing the pack. People watch in horror as the helicopter crashes and severs the bridge's suspension cables on the way down. The professor's laptop indicates the dogs are now uncontrollable, and Jung-won is horrified to see there are 116 of them. A minute later, the van doors burst open. The dogs leap out and begin tearing apart anyone they encounter. One of them attacks the professor, and Jung-won, barely fighting it off, manages to push the scientist into a car and runs to find his daughter. Just then, the attendant shows up with his little dog. They see a fighting dog stop in front of them until Jung-won realizes it's about to pounce and shouts for everyone to run. Yura and Mi-ran, who also witness the attacks, get ready to defend themselves with the dolphin grabbing her claw. She fends off the first attack and escapes, helping her friend along. Panic begins. People try to flee, but the massive wreck cause prevents this. Many fall victim to these terrifying animals, including some of the military. The attendant, holding his dog, Judy, tries to hide in a car, but there's already a killer dog inside, forcing him to keep running. Jung-won and his daughter jump into a car. He starts the engine, ready to drive away, but the girl spots the attendant and begs her father to help him. Seeing a dog closing in on the guy, Jung-won pops open the trunk, the attendant dives in, and Jung-won steps on the gas. Meanwhile, Yura and Mi-ran manage to reach the bus where the elderly couple are sitting, and they hop on. Jung-won drives down the open way. When he sees flames up ahead that quickly spread to nearby cars, making it impossible to leave the bridge. The attendant curses everyone and everything, demanding that Jung-won drive, but it's impossible. Just then, a dog jumps onto the windshield. Meanwhile, Jung-won's boss learns of the situation and looks for ways to solve it. Helicopters can't fly and boats can't help because the bridge is far above sea level. Besides, he can't make sense of the incoherent reports referencing dogs. Reporters demand answers from the presidential candidate, but he keeps quiet about the problem, promising to resolve it as soon as possible. In the meantime, the dog, realizing it can't reach the people inside the car, leaves. Jung-won revives the professor, who confesses that he was developing rescue dogs, but the military decided that killer dogs would suit their needs better. Just then, the presidential candidate is informed that the military tried adapting the dogs for anti-terrorist operations, but the project was shut down. The specimens were to be destroyed, yet they escaped during transport and are now terrorizing the crash survivors. Jung-won again calls his boss, and this time the connection goes through. The boss tells him to get off the bridge immediately because among the jammed vehicles, there's a tanker carrying poisonous gas. He says that he himself has only just learned about Project Silence and orders Jung-won to tell no one about it. Once everything is over, he'll go to the very top to punish those responsible. At that moment, an explosion happens and the poisonous gas starts spreading across the bridge. The bus driver signals to gather the survivors, and when Jung-won sees this, he tells his daughter to breathe through a cloth and orders everyone to follow him. While his daughter and the attendant escape, Jung-won asks his boss to send rescue teams to the bridge as the suspension cables are on the verge of collapsing. That's exactly what happens. The cables begin to snap. By then, Jung-won, the professor, the attendant, and Mi-ran manage to board the bus, and the driver quickly takes off on the only relatively clear lane away from the fire. But the bridge itself starts collapsing. Cars plummet into the river, and the others pile into one big barricade. The bus ends up trapped. Jung-won tells everyone that rescue operations are delayed due to the heavy fog. However, he has managed to contact the authorities, who promise to do everything in their power to save the survivors. He explains the dogs' behavior by saying they have rabies, which people find hard to believe, since initially the dogs behave quite normally. The attendant only fans the flames by scoffing at this theory. Jung-won promises to arrange for the attendant to be rewarded if he keeps quiet about everything that happened once they get out. Soon, special forces arrive at the bus to say they haven't found any dogs. They tell people to go with them, but Jung-won unexpectedly stops the passengers and contacts his boss, since the latter had promised to neutralize the dogs first. The boss promises protection, and the people agree to leave the bus. However, the professor asks to remain, believing the dogs are merely hiding. Jung-won drags him outside anyway, because he's an important witness in the upcoming investigation. They walk toward the city when the professor asks for help finding the laptop he used to control the dogs. Suddenly, car horns begin to blare from different directions. The special forces are distracted as they check the cars and are attacked by the dogs. In mere minutes, many of them are torn apart. Jung-won barely manages to get his daughter to safety. Meanwhile, Jung-won's boss receives word that contact with the special forces has been lost. Jung-won returns his daughter to the bus for safety, then goes back for the lost radio. At the site of the tragedy, he finds his daughter's missing book, written by her mother. Meanwhile, the girl is reviewing the final hospital footage of her mother when she hears the professor's voice. He has also reached the bus and wants to guide his Silex. At this moment, Jung-won discovers several survivors hiding in a small van and suggests they figure out how to escape on their own, rather than relying on rescuers. The professor tries to convince the girl that it's impossible to trick the dogs. They were all cloned from E9, and to make E9 vicious, they tormented and killed puppies in front of her. Now she's taking revenge on humans for her children. Meanwhile, the survivors make torches and head to the bus, coordinating with the security chief who tells them which way to go for guaranteed safety. Jung-won asks them to have snipers ready to shoot the dogs. The boss realizes the project can't be covered up. Young-min sees the torches and wants to open the bus doors, but the professor stops her. Seeing that the torches are almost burned out, the dogs move in to attack, so the attendant pulls off a fire show using alcohol, while Jung-won fires a flare gun. The dogs retreat, allowing Jung-min to open the doors and the survivors to dash under the bus. And then it turns out there are no keys in the ignition. However, Jung-won points out that the attendant has a universal lockpick. He starts the bus. Meanwhile, the minister calls the security chief and reminds him that the incident could interfere with his election. Thus, they can blame it all on the bridge collapse, but in that case, there must be no survivors. Otherwise, everyone will find out what happened to the project under his supervision. Just then, the bus reaches the exit from the bridge, and Jung-won tries to contact his boss. Yuro points to the dogs waiting for them, but Jung-won insists the snipers are ready. However, the radio is silent, and the bridge begins to sway. Jung-won turns to the professor, ordering him to call off the dogs since he created them. The scientist refuses. So, Young-min suggests setting a trap. The people hide in the luggage compartment after leaving the bus doors open, with the lights on and music playing. At that moment, the elderly woman dies from her injuries. While her husband mourns over her body, the dogs enter the bus, and the doors slam shut behind them, triggered by the device rigged by the attendant. Everyone leaves, but the old man refuses to abandon his wife's body. What's more, the dogs have discovered the hatch and are about to open it. The old man tells everyone else to go while he holds off the dogs. The attendant drags Jung-won away, forcing him to comply. They manage to glimpse the dogs attacking the old man before fleeing. 5 survivors make it to the edge of the bridge, but there is no sign of rescuers or the snipers. Jung-won realizes that his boss has betrayed him. The professor confirms that the project was approved by that very man. Jung-won switches on the radio and tells his boss he knows everything now. The bridge is about to collapse, burying everyone, including the dogs. Still, he intends to lead the others towards Seoul, where, according to his boss, there are gas tanks. At that moment, the group notices the attendant's tow truck at the very end of the jam, but the keys were left in the bus. Next to it is the truck cage in which the dogs were transported. The professor realizes he dropped his laptop here. They soon find it, and the scientist gets to work. Jung-won goes to the truck and asks his daughter for her mother's book so he can read it aloud, luring the dogs. Yura picks up her golf club. The professor activates the signal, and Yura whacks golf balls into the windshield of the bus where the dogs are locked. They rush toward the calm, gathering around the truck while the attendant darts over to the bus, but E9 is waiting for him inside. He manages to get away, but the dog chases him until it sees the professor, overtakes the attendant, and attacks the scientist. At that moment, another section of the bridge collapses, dragging the cage full of dogs down. However, the truck itself is left hanging on the edge. E9 leaves the professor and runs to where her offspring perished. The attendant starts the tow truck and drives toward the dangling vehicle, but Jung-won radios him to tell everyone to get out. Young-min, however, disobeys and attaches the cable to the truck, though E9 is in the way. The bridge shakes, E9 falls over the edge, and the girl is pinned under a wrecked car while the truck dangles precariously. Jung-won tries to pull himself up, spotting his daughter, who nevertheless managed to hook the truck with the tow cable. The attendant pulls it up to the top and drags it toward the city when the bridge finally collapses, tearing the cage off the tow truck. He stops at a safe spot just as the truck, rolling by its own momentum, comes up behind them. They're greeted by a crowd led by Jung-won's boss. He applauds when he sees Jung-won, but Jung-won punches him in the face and gives back the money he had received. Then he announces to everyone that everything was recorded on his watch. The professor is also ready to testify with all the evidence. The candidate walks away, trying to escape. Young Min tells her father she won't go abroad and will stay with him. The news explodes with stories about the dogs who became victims of experiments, and He-9 emerges onto the shore, having saved one of her puppies. The film is quite dynamic, though its plot seems unrealistic, considering the somewhat illogical actions of the characters. Even so, it's a decent disaster movie worth watching.